By the beginning of the 15th century AD, the Byzantine Empire was a bleak shadow of its former majesty. Back in the 6th century, it was at its peak of power. Justinian the Great was the emperor. His armies, led by talented general Belisarius, retook most of the Roman lands in the west. The emperor's rule spread from Pyrenees to Caucasus. But after this, influence and power of Byzantium gradually declined. There were rises and falls, but as centuries passed, the empire was losing lands. By 1453, the empire shrank to the size of a city-state. Only a tiny piece of land around Constantinople and on the Peloponnese remained under the emperor's rule. From all sides, the Ottoman Empire surrounded Byzantium. The Ottomans dreamed about capturing Constantinople for many years. 4 times they besieged the city, but each time, for one reason or another, they had to retreat. Constantinople was too hard of a nut to crack for them. There were a few reasons for this. First and foremost, Constantinople was the most impregnable city of the 15th century. 2 rings of strong walls built under the rule of Theodosius the Second protected the city. On the land side, there was a 30 feet deep and wide moat with a lower wall on the inner side. Second, Constantinople was almost impossible to besiege fully. Even when all land supply lines were cut, the city still could be resupplied by sea. Many enemies tried to block maritime supply but failed. The Byzantines possessed a secret of the Greek fire. It was a flammable napalm-like substance. Many times enemy fleets burned in this ferocious, inextinguishable flame. Another advantage for the defenders was the Golden Horn Bay. Its entrance was locked by heavy chains made of steel. Byzantine fishermen could sail freely in the bay, providing the city with fresh fish. In 1451, Mehmed II became the new Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. For many years, he dreamed about capturing Constantinople. From the very first day of his rule, he started preparation for the siege. At the end of 1451, he ordered to build a fortress named Rumeli-Hisar in the most narrow part of the Bosporus Strait. On the opposite side of the waterway, there was another fortress, Andalu-Hisar. His great-grandfather Bayezid I built it. When the construction of Rumeli-Hisar was complete, the Ottoman artillery gained full control over the Strait of Bosporus. The other strait, Dardanelles, was also controlled by the Ottomans. Emperor Constantine realized how grim was the situation of his city. He desperately sought help from the Christian powers, but help did not come. European countries were busy with their own troubles and did not have the means to help Byzantium. England and France fought 100 Years' War. Spaniards were in the middle of Reconquista. The Holy Roman Empire was torn apart by internal conflicts. Hungary and Poland had not recovered yet after crushing defeats at Varna and Kosovo. Rus had just started to rise from the ashes after the Mongolian invasion. Besides this, the fortifications of Constantinople were so impressive, and the city withstood so many sieges, that many people in Europe did not believe that the Ottomans would be able to succeed this time. Europeans still remembered the incredible wealth and power of Byzantium. Still, Constantinople was a bleak shadow of its former self. The city population that once reached 500,000, by 1453 dropped to mere 60,000. Most buildings were abandoned, and whole districts were demolished to free land for farming. By the mid-15th century, Constantinople, a marvelous and powerful city, turned into several settlements surrounded by ancient walls. On the 2nd of April, Mehmed II's army approached Constantinople. Sultan brought an 80,000-strong army with around 10,000 Janissaries, the most elite Ottoman infantry. The Ottoman fleet arrived a little later and consisted of 31 galleys and 95 large rowboats. Also, Ottomans were accompanied by a small unit of allied Serbian light cavalry. Ottoman artillery played a crucial part in the siege. Mehmed II ordered to construct cannons capable of bringing the walls of Constantinople down. According to a legend, a Hungarian engineer named Orban created the main siege cannon. He first offered his service to Byzantium, but Constantine did not have the funds to cover the construction cost. That's why Orban went to Mehmed and created for him the biggest cannon of the time, named Basilic. Ottomans deployed several artillery batteries, with the total number of guns reaching 200. The Ottomans hugely outnumbered the defenders of the city. Of those who remained in Constantinople, only around 6,000 were able to fight. Besides this, There were about 2,000 or 3,000 foreign fighters, primarily mercenaries. The biggest was the squad of the Genoese condottiere Giovanni Giustiniani. Realizing that Giustiniani was a highly experienced warrior, Constantine made him the commander of the land defenses. Also, on the Byzantine side fought several Venetian and Genoese ships. Ottoman artillery advantage was also overwhelming. Byzantines had almost no cannons. Just before the siege, they bought several small guns, but it turned out that it was hard to host artillery crews on the 1,000-year-old walls, to the point that Byzantine artillery sometimes was just as damaging to the walls as the enemy one. Not every soldier from the 80,000-strong Ottoman army stormed the walls of Constantinople. Around 30,000 were engaged in engineering and siege work. Still, attackers heavily outnumbered the defenders. The city was doomed, but the defenders were still hopeful that they might be able to defend it one more time. Mehmed II offered Constantine to surrender. He promised him life, his emperor title, and Byzantine lands on Peloponnese, but Constantine refused. On the 6th of April, Ottomans started bombarding the city. Cannonballs were making devastating breaches in the walls, but cannons of that time had a pretty low rate of fire. It took several hours to prepare a gun for a new shot. Mehmed II sent forward light infantry covered by artillery fire. Their task was to fill the moat by throwing brushwood bundles and bags with sand into it. Byzantines tried to prevent it by shooting arrows at them, but there were few archers on the walls, and damage from them was minimal. Ottoman soldiers continued their job without even trying to cover. When artillery fire stopped at night, Byzantines sent repair crews to fix the walls and clear the moat. Shelling lasted for almost 2 weeks. By this time, despite Byzantine attempts to prevent this, the Ottomans managed to fill the moat, so the infantry could pass through it. At the same time, on the 12th of April, Ottoman fleet led by Admiral Baltoglu arrived. Baltoglu immediately tried to break through into the Golden Horn Bay. He hoped to destroy the chains blocking the passage to the bay, or carry his light ships over it. But this plan failed, and Ottoman vessels got blocked. Byzantine fleet sailed out to meet them and used the Greek fire against the attacking boats. The Ottomans had to retreat after a few of their ships burned and sank. The Turks attempted the first assault on the night of the April 18th. During the shelling, the cannons significantly breached one of the walls. At night, their infantry passed the moat and rushed towards the breach. But Turks could not close the distance and notice it. When they reached the breach, they were met by the elite Genoese infantry, led by Justiniani himself. The fight lasted for many hours, and the Ottomans retreated, leaving a few hundred dead bodies under the wall. Defenders, on the other hand, did not suffer any casualties. This first small victory raised the morale in the besieged city. 2 days after the first assault, 3 Genoese and 1 Byzantine ship broke through the Ottoman blockade. They were loaded with wheat from Sicily, weapons and armor for the defenders. The ships approached the city, but a solid north wind picked up and hindered their movement. The Ottoman fleet surrounded and attacked them, but it was not easy at all to take them on board. The deck of the Genoese ships was 2 meters higher than the deck of the Ottoman rowboats. In addition, the Byzantine ship used Greek fire. The sailors tied the 4 ships with ropes together, creating a floating fortress. The inhabitants of Constantinople poured onto the walls and followed the course of the naval battle. From the opposite shore, Sultan Mehmed II personally observed the fight. At first, the wind drove the ships to the Aegean coast of the Bosporus, where the vessels would become easy prey for the Turks, but then a calm settled. Seeing no progress, Admiral Baltoglu led several ships with emissaries to board European ships, but numerous Ottoman attacks were repulsed. The Turks lost several hundred people, and Baltoglu himself lost an eye in this battle. The Europeans lost only 23 people killed. Soon the wind changed, and the ships were able to enter the Golden Horn. In the city, people met them as heroes. The Sultan was infuriated, and he ordered to behead Baltoglu, but the emissaries stood up for their admiral, telling the Sultan about the admiral's courage during the fight. Mehmed then pardoned Baltoglu, but removed him from the command of the fleet, deprived him of all his property, and subjected him to a humiliating flogging. It became clear to the Turks that if the problem of the naval blockade was not solved, the city would be able to defend itself for a very long time. Turkish engineers found an ingenious solution to this problem. They built a pass of logs between the Bosporus shore and the Golden Horn's inner part. The logs were richly oiled, and several dozen ships were dragged along them in one night. After that, the city was completely blocked from the sea, lost its fleet, and starvation loomed over the defenders. In addition, the Byzantines had to stretch their forces. They had to move some defenders to the Golden Horn shore to prevent the Ottoman forces from landing there. All this time, the Ottoman cannons did not stop the shelling of the city walls. Also, the Turks made a series of tunnels under the walls to place an explosive charge and cause the walls to collapse. Still, the Byzantines neutralized the Turkish tunnels with the help of counter-tunnels. Some Ottoman tunnels were flooded and some collapsed after the Byzantines destroyed the pillars supporting them. There were 14 tunnels in total, but none of them reached the goal. All this time, negotiations were going on between Turks and Byzantines on the terms of surrender and lifting the siege. Constantine was ready to pay any ransom, but refused to surrender the city to the Ottomans. He still hoped for outside help, mainly from the Venetians. He was sure that the reinforcements were already on their way to Constantinople. On the night of May 3rd, the Byzantines sent a ship to look for them. The ship sailed under the Turkish flag, and the sailors were wearing Ottoman clothes. Thanks to this, the ship managed to slip past the Ottoman patrols. A few weeks later, the ship returned to Constantinople and brought the news that nobody was coming to the besieged city's aid. On the night of May 29th, the Turks launched the final assault. By this time, artillery had made 3 breaches in the walls. Mehmed II split his army into 3 large columns. Each column rushed to one of the breaches. The Turkish sailors also attacked the city from the sea. The plan of Mehmed II was to stretch the forces of the city defenders as much as possible. The Ottomans attacked 3 times. The defenders repulsed the first 2 attacks. The Ottoman army suffered significant losses each time, but the third attack was successful. A detachment of 3,000 Janissaries broke into the besieged city. The Ottoman flag waved over one of the city towers. But even this assault could have been repulsed. Even after breaking through the walls, the Janissaries met the fierce resistance of the highly skilled Genoese infantry. But in the pivotal moment of the battle, the Genoese commander Giovanni Giustiniani was mortally wounded by a stray bullet. This forced Genoese to retreat, carrying their commander to safety. The Turks poured into the city like a stream breaking through a dam. The fate of Constantinople was sealed. The defense of the city crumbled and turned into a series of rapidly fading street fights. The last emperor of the Byzantine Empire fell in one of such fights. When he learned about the Ottoman breakthrough, he said, "The city has fallen, but I haven't yet," and went into the battle. The emperor dressed like an ordinary Byzantine soldier, so after the battle was over, his mutilated body was identified only by purple boots with his insignia. In a few days, the commander of the Serbian cavalry and a few captive Byzantines identified his head. Mehmed II led his army to plunder the city for 3 days. Thousands of citizens were killed, and tens of thousands were enslaved. On the 3rd day, the Sultan himself entered the city and stopped the violence. From this day, Constantinople became the new capital of the Ottoman Empire. This is how the last fragment of antiquity perished. The Middle Ages were already declining in Europe, and Renaissance was just around the corner. After securing this victory, Mehmed II added Caesar Rum to his title, meaning the Caesar of the Romans. The Ottomans, in fact, managed to collect almost all the former Byzantine lands, but that's another story.